Today I'm talking with Josh, aka the 047 Sports and TCG Cards. He's a 30-year collector with a ton of experience. We discuss if this is the junk wax era of UFC cards, grading and flipping vintage packs, and PSA versus SGC. As always, I hope you enjoy this video. All right, I have with us Josh from the 047 Sports Cards and TCG. I've been talking with Josh for a long time behind the scenes, asking him questions, picking his brain. He's a longtime collector. Thanks for coming on the show, Josh. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, I'm excited just as well, Zach. I think you've done a tremendous job with the channel and just with everything you're doing, the editing and everything. I think it's just kick butt. So I'm excited to get into a lot of things with you here today.
Oh, yeah. Josh is a man. He's been collecting for a long time. How long have you been collecting, Josh? I don't think I've ever asked you that specific question.
Well, I would say that I got heavy back into things right around 2016, 2017. But I collected as a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, during those years. My story is sort of similar to a lot of folks. Is like I was into it as a kid, got away from it, college, high school, work, and then I got back into it. So, um, the past 8 years have been 8 to 10 years have really been really interesting in the hobby as a whole. Just of how much change has gone on throughout. So,
Yeah, so that's kind of a great segue. So, since you've been collecting kind of for such a long period of time, what are some of the differences that you see right now in modern collecting versus some of the differences, from 10, 15 years ago?
yeah, back then set collecting was huge. That was the thing. You wanted to put together all the sets, and at that time there weren't a lot of sets that were needing to be put together. So it was really narrowed down focus. And I would say the second thing, the big thing on that component is people used to work up to get to their big card. And you either could be auto and some of the cards that you've gotten and worked up to. Back then you used to really hold on to your cards and trade or cash and work your way up to those big cards. I think now a lot of times just with the ultra modern and modern, there's a lot of flipping, that's
Yeah.
immediate. People feel like they can just go out and if I got a couple $1,000s, I can go out and buy my grail card. I can go do it. And so I think the mindset from back then to net current now is quite, but some of the things are still the same. I think people are still, trying to collect, really special things along the way, and how can they attain them? And PC, I guess, was the personal collection was a huger thing back then than it is
Right.
now in my mind. A lot of people don't. I I think it's 50-50 right now, to be honest with you, Zach. People have a PC, they don't have a PC, and if they do, sometimes it's not the it is. It's not the goats. It's not the big cards per se. It's somebody that's sort of off the side. That's sort of like personal to them, grew up in their hometown or from their
Right.
area. That's their PC type stuff. I'm trying to think of one other big thing that's really different is the flip mentality I mentioned. I think it's just a lot of you know back then too. Grading wasn't as important as it is nowadays. Everything it feels like needs graded, and that's not the way it is. I was back when PSA and SGC and Beckett all started, in 98, 99 grading cards. That was like a crazy thing to do.
Right. Well,
It's
okay.
kind of
So they've only
ridiculous
been
now, but
around for if they started in 98, 99.
yeah.
Interesting.
When I graduated high school in 1998, so I might be dating myself a little bit, but that's when, yeah, PSAs, and first started, and the idea of sending your card
Right.
to a grading company and getting it back was just a ridiculous thought. And
I mean,
now it's just like,
to be honest, if you really think about it, it is kind of silly now, even now, when you think about it. I mean, I understand everybody understands why to do it, but to pay money for somebody to look at your card and be like, this is a little bit better, let's give it a 10 versus a 9, is still pretty silly. But man, that's really interesting. For whatever reason, I had never looked at the actual origin of these companies, and to know that they're that recent in history is very interesting. That's awesome.
oh yeah,
And so we're talking about 1998, 99. That's right around, I guess, when you were watching UFC, right? Because I know you're always we're always talking about the fights and like modern fighters and stuff, and you're always talking about the good old days. You love the good old
Yep.
days, the early 2000s. So do you want to talk about kind of when you got into UFC around that time?
Well, I'll definitely carry the torch for the old folks. Um, well, too. My dad was watched a lot of MMA and stuff back then, but understand Zach, like back then, it was like a bootleg of a pay per view event that you watched, and the weigh-ins were done in like a hotel lobby, and
Yeah.
and the events were like you'd have a couple thousand people that would show up, to like some like facility out in Atlanta, Georgia that was open air. It was like a tractor pull type thing. So and you would do multiple, fighters would fight multiple fights a night. And I think that's
Yeah.
sort of too, where I always communicate to you is like, I always got that like vibe on me, like, fighters were a little bit tougher back then. But here's the reason where I come from that is that, you'd have to fight different styles. So that, in a one night tournament, back then in 98, 99, 2000, you'd have to fight, if you made it through, you'd have to fight like three or four different folks and they'd all, someone have a ground game, so you'd have to really, it would really challenge you in different ways, in that genre. And man, I got into it. I owe it a lot to my dad, because he loved watching those fights whenever we could somehow find them,
Yeah.
in the whatever pay-per-view tape that we got from on VCR. So it was kind of a crazy time. And to come to now to what it is, I mean, there's more people that the weigh-in of current UFC
Yeah.
fights than ever went to fights in 1998 or 2000 or what have you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Whenever we're talking about these old OGs in the UFC and in MMA, those guys were, I mean, everyone's an animal, right? But like to fight three fights in a row, to go back and watch, they had it on ESPN Plus, and so I went back and I watched like 1 through 10 when they had it on there, and those dudes they were coming out for the second fight already all swelled up, already all tired. Like it was a completely different game, man. Absolutely incredible what they did back in the day. And that's an interesting
And
point
different
about.
rules too.
That's true. What's his name? This guy was smashing this other guy in the balls. I think he hit him 10 times in the ball. Pulling hair. It was absolutely wild. So to see us to come from that as fans, to come from that to where it is now, where now we're talking about. Me personally, I think it needs to even elevate even more and become more mainstream like the NBA and like the NFL, which is crazy to think of when it's only been 25, 30 years since those times. And you are a really big proponent of I actually got it in quotes here on the notes. Sell the hype, buy the goats.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great quote. And do you want to tell us some examples about what you mean by that, and maybe some of how that worked out or how that didn't work out?
I think anytime, listen to this. I think anytime that you can get positive news going for your card collection of folks that you have in your card collection. So if there's some positive buds, like you go back to UFC wise, Patty the Batty,
Uh-huh.
just like even like simple nickname type things that get people stirred up. Um, Anything that you see a rise in the market when it comes to just a hype for a particular fighter, and in sports, it's just like leading up to the season right now. Right now is like super hype season in football. Everybody's trying to speculate on what's going to happen in
Right.
the NFL season, and they're buying those cards based on that speculation. I'd say though, just in the hype thing, A is you can immediately lose your butt, especially if you're buying huge cards of those type
Right.
of people that you're speculating on. And the second thing is when I say sell, buy the goats, sell the hype. What I'm not saying is go ahead and buy a base Tom Brady or a base Anderson Silva or something that's low end. Okay. What I'm saying is go park your money when you do sell hype and hopefully you're making profit, that you go and buy actual goat cards like that we were talking about, the pride card
Yeah.
or John Jones 2010 round one, like those type of things. If you're in the UFC, UFC wise, put your money in those parking lots. Don't go out there and buy the 2024 Chrome, Anderson Silva, one of 199 or something like that. I think that's the big distinction I would make hype versus goat conversation. But yeah, I don't. You got to look at those cards as day trading in my mind.
Yeah,
The ultra modern and the modern cards don't. And even if you sell it and you really love that card, odds are 99% of the time you can go buy that card back.
for
It's
sure.
not like it's not like it's lost forever. So I think a lot of that mindset, that if you have that mindset of like, this is not something I need to hold, if it's not, what I consider goat material, then move it and get into something that is goat material, and have those as long, because that's going to be your long term revenue in my mind, is a lot of those type cards. And we've seen some extreme highs with some UFC cards. Obviously Khabib has hit some serious, 5-figure cards.
Yeah.
I think we're on the verge of getting 6-figure UFC card at some point here down the road. I don't know what card it's going to be. It may be a card that that I think right now it shouldn't be, and it is, or
Yeah.
something of that nature. But I do feel like UFC is trending that way, and fighter cards as whole. You got to think about this, Zach. Like, and bring up some vintage, but like I started collecting a lot of fighter cards and educate myself on vintage fighter cards back in the day. 2009, basically, for UFC to the current time, I mean, we're talking infancy. We are in the
Right.
infancy of UFC. And once UFC is, 30, 30 years down the road, 35, 40, 45 years down the road, I think you're going to see, I'm talking card wise,
Right.
I think you're going to see, a tremendous uptick in UFC cards, but it's going to take some time. And, you may be 60, 70, 80 years old when that
Yeah.
happens. There. It's going to happen. I think
Mhm.
it's UFC has got a strong backing, and it's very particular too in terms of people wanting to invest in those type of cards. So I think there's a lot of room for growth, is what I would say.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good point you brought up just about the long-term aspect of it. And that's kind of I'm really kind of a long-term guy, delayed gratification, working towards bigger goals and whatnot, just in kind of a broad area, philosophy of life. So I've really kind of had kind of that mindset for a while with UFC cards. It's just kind of thinking really long term. So I like that you brought that up about, being a grandpa, 70 years old, and then that's when you have all the cards that are really sought after, and to me, that's fine, but that's something kind of maybe that the viewers should ask themselves as well. Is like, if that's not what you want, then maybe you should collect something else. And you collect a lot of different things, and you
I
seem to
do.
have had some really good luck with some of your investment strategies, if you want to call it that, with football. And recently, you even mentioned that you kind of noticed a trend with the graded packs.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of tell people what that is and kind of what you kind of noticed as far as the trend with that?
Well, I'll say first off too, there are a lot of UFC vintage, what we call vintage 2009, 2010 packs that have been graded by PSA. But yeah, I'm a follower of the '86 Jordan Fleer. Uh, it's
Nice.
sort of a card that I've could have purchased about a billion times in my life, and for some odd reason I chose not to. But anyways, I follow that card all the time, and one day back here in July, I was following it, and just some sales and some things, and I was seeing that the packs, graded packs of '86 Fleer, were going for more than the actual Jordan cards that were in like a PSA 4 or PSA 5, or that type thing, which blew my mind, because I was like, people are paying more for a graded pack that was
Right.
in that box rather than an actual Michael Jordan.
Well,
And then I seen. Go ahead.
Josh, do you know why people are doing that? Like, what's the thought process? Because with the pack, you don't even know if the Jordan's in there. Are they just, is it just a speculation game? Like, what's going on?
Oh, it's definitely a speculation game, but I also think, and we see this a lot aside on the TCG side, on the Pokemon side too, is I think there is a legitimate, when you're talking about vintage, wax, I think there is a legitimate concern nowadays about whether or not your pack or box is legitimate. We've seen a
Okay.
lot of different, videos where, people have opened stuff that has not been what was it supposed to be in that box. So I think PSA grading packs. is helping authenticate actual packs, and that's what people want to, people want to have, is they want to know in the future. And I feel like in the future, and I did a video on this about sending some packs, and I'm doing it right now. I got some packs of PSA, um, that to see how this whole works and to see what the market truly is for it. But I will tell you, if it does become successful for me, and I do think it's interesting to collect a pack,
Yeah.
easier to do it too than collecting a bunch of boxes and
Right.
wax and in your house and things like that. But anyways,
Probably
I
displays better too, as the actual graded pack probably displays better than the whole box.
absolutely, and I think it's kind of neat. It's kind of unique,
Mhm.
and some of the UFC stuff, with like uh, GSP on the cover of some of the packs back in
Yeah.
the day, and some of those things like round one and stuff, and main event. There's just a lot of stuff from a UFC standpoint that I can see being like, collectible from 30 years, like we're talking about now. It'd be
Right.
cool to have a pack that was preserved. And I'll tell you, the way breaking's going, Zach, nowadays, and the gambling aspect of sports cards,
Right.
I feel like breakers are going to want valid packs, in the future. And even this whole like CT scan situation
Yeah,
that's
that's wild.
um, there's just a lot of things I think that are bubbling on the surface with packs and wax in general, that I think if you can find slivers in the market that are to your advantage and are different and have low pops, I think those are the things to go after, and that's sort of where I'm at with it right now. Um, but yeah, I bet you someday there will probably be a round one pack that is UFC that is graded sell for more than you know
Yeah, one of the
uh,
hits, one of the
one of
biggest
the
hits in it.
hits.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
crazy. But honestly, I'm not surprised because I we see it with even almost Grail cards and then products, right? So it's really no different than that. For whatever reason, the speculation always gets the best of people, and I'm really excited to see what your results are with that because, like
Yeah.
you were saying, I don't know if I have enough money or would want to invest in a round one box, but getting a round one pack would be, like 1/10 of that, and I think that would really be fun too.
And that's a great point, Zach. I mean, the fact that you could have sort of a piece of history without purchasing, a several $1,000
Right.
box, I think that's a turn on for me personally as a collector, to be like, oh yeah, that's something I would like to have. You know what I mean? As sort of a a personal. I'm not necessarily looking to sell those packs per se at this moment, but I may flip one to pay for pay for
Right.
something else. But I'm just trying to see into it. And me, I'll turn 45 in September. Um, you can never stop learning in this hobby. This is what I love about card collecting. Never stop learning. You can always learn something new every single day about cards and things, and I think that's the lesson I constantly teach myself every single day. And just being a collector is, don't think you know it all. Once you think you know it all, that's going to be where you start making your mistakes and things like that. There's tons of stuff I still don't know about, even though I've been the rigmarole of so many different things with cards. I don't know it, and I probably won't know everything about cards, and that's okay. But never stop, trying to accumulate information so that you can make the best decisions in what's for you in the hobby.
I love that, man. And that's what's so cool about getting to talk with you in particular and lots of other guests is just kind of picking people's brain and learning from other people because everyone thinks differently and everyone has different, scenarios and has gone through different things in their life. So they have different perspectives, which make them problem solve better or differently, not necessarily better or worse. But thank you again for coming on, man. This is really cool. As far as since we're kind of talking about advice and stuff, what kind of
Yep.
advice do you have for newer collectors? And in particular, trading or going to card shows in person, because you gave me some great advice on how to approach like a deal or like a big deal. So do you have any advice? It can be pretty general for newer collectors.
Yeah. The number one and number 1A. Do not rip boxes unless you can rip boxes out of profit. So what I mean for that is, don't be going out to your local, hobby shop or your local retail store and buy a bunch of boxes and start ripping and thinking you're going to hit the next, super card. It's not going to happen. Um, I do advocate though, and if you want to go see some degeneracy, you go over to Huck on Degen Rips, and
Right.
See how he's working it all out. But he's a lot smarter than a lot of people think, and he's doing a lot of things behind the scenes that make that all reality. But in bottom line is, don't rip unless a you made profit on a card or made profit somewhere else in your life to where you're paying for that box, and no matter what happens when you rip that box, you know you're okay with it. Okay, that I think that's the number one thing that I see a Conasan. The second thing I would tell, don't buy into breaks. Don't
Yeah.
buy into breaks. You are doing strict, gambling. It's to me, it's kind of a laborious process as a whole. Sitting there trying to fill spots for a break, doing, it's
It's a
just
lot of a
like
lot of
it's a
dead
waste.
time. A lot of dead
A lot
time
of
for sure.
a lot of dead time. Um, and what I would say, to some newer folks too, and I see that as a lot of times at card shows, and people ask me some different things of what get into, not get into. I evaluate the market, evaluate what you're seeing and what things are selling for, and what you feel like may or may not happen, especially on the ultra modern standpoint. Now, when you're talking vintage, I mean, those are very pretty set in stone type things, where you can get comps very regularly. You can see, nobody's worried about a Babe Ruth or a Jackie Robinson or Michael Jordan or like Anderson Silva, John Jones. Like, nobody's worried about those type of cards of where they're going to end up,
Right.
because they're sort of like they're your safe investments to me. They're your bonds, and so I would say, if you're gonna do the flip game, which I do a lot too. Now, mind you, I do it. You just got to be. You can't be holding stuff for very long. You got to get it out of your hands. And I'll tell you too, is if you got bunch of PSA nines at home and they don't really mean much to you, either get them consigned, get them, trade them, sell them, get that money and put it towards something that you think is going to make a difference. And you have to decide whether it's going to be in your PC, or things you're going to hold for the long term, or things you're going to hold for a year or 6 months or 3 months. I think a lot of that thinking about the market, you got to treat it just like a stock. Every card is a stock. And I want to tell you this quick, Zach. I know I'm going on here a little rant, but the greatest conversation with my 12-year-old son, Lincoln. I had all these cards, and I said to him, I said, when I'm 60, 70, 80, and when I'm handing this stuff down to you, do you want all this? And he was like, no, I want the best ones. I want the
Right.
best cards.
Hmm.
And that sort of changed my mindset too. And I'll tell you, I consigned, I sold this year. I'm approaching about 5,000 cards that I've sold this year.
Wow.
A lot of it
Nice.
through consignment, through DC Sports 87, ComC, and then a lot of stuff too that I've sold or unloaded at shows and different things on Discord or what have you. But I've got rid of a lot of stuff, and to be honest with you, I was sitting on stuff that I'm not into it for anything. So everything that I made on that stuff was profit anyway. So that's when you're really winning. And I'll tell you right now, everything in my PC, every card I own, I'm into that card for nothing. And I'll tell you that, if you're out there and you're listening to this, the dream is to be not into your cards for anything.
Mhm.
Because then you can make smart decisions. You can have a little more flexibility when you're dealing with people at card shows and things like that. I think the biggest thing too that I see, and you did a great job of this, at least explaining it on your end, but putting cash on the table, bringing that cash out, baby. I mean,
You should
that's
put the
going to make the
cash
difference.
out.
Yeah, we can all do PayPal, Cash App, and da 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 da. But when you put those $100 bills and you stack them up on a table,
Hmm.
um, it changes. It changes. It changes the concept of what the deal is. Because it's cold hard cash. I'm here for business, baby, and I think
Yeah.
that's what people respond to, and that's what I think that gives you a tremendous advantage when you're out dealing deals. When you can give people cash, they don't
Yeah.
have to worry about PayPal or hitting your account or family or da 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 da. It's like, yeah, do it.
There's something
So
like visceral. There's something like visceral
yeah,
about having it on the table. It's almost like I mean, we are programmed, right? We're like programmed to view those dollar bills, and it like does something to our brain. It's almost survival basically for us now. So I loved when you brought up that tip, to me because I completely agree. I think that's a huge factor, and it definitely is going to take make people pay attention to what you're saying, and it's going to make people want to get the deal done because they see that money on the table. You had brought
Well,
up,
too, if
yeah, go
you know,
ahead.
if they can see their profit right in front of them,
Yeah,
that makes a huge difference too. You know what I
yeah.
mean? It's a visual, like you're saying. So yeah, I totally on step with you.
Yeah, you had mentioned PSA nines, and that kind of just
Yeah.
brought up something in my head. Um, you're a big SGC guy, and for whatever reason, a
Okay.
couple years ago when I started getting into the hobby, there was like two camps. It was like SGC is absolute garbage and PSA is the king. And I kind of feel like that narrative is changing a little bit. So what are your thoughts on SGC as a grading company as a whole?
Well, I'm going to pinpoint for you where things a lot changed recently, and it was so let's say right before the pandemic. So let's say I'm going to say 2018, 2019. You know, right in that range. Maybe 2017 too. I'll say maybe those 2017 through 2019. So you're not going to believe this, Zach, but the majority in PSA 10s and cracking them, and I mean, and cracking them and sending them to BGS
Mm,
so they could hope that they get a 9.5. Beckett was the major, grader at that moment.
interesting.
Was, and now Beckett is completely,
Yeah,
Beckett went through the pandemic and just, didn't do anything, didn't say anything. They just didn't respond to any customers or just things in general, and they lost everybody. They became like the worst grading company now when they were the number one, when they had total control. And then SGC took advantage of that. So they started, coming back up and they were a strong number two. And now, PSA has sort of really overtaken the market as a whole, even though they really had a stronghold on the market as a whole to begin with, in a sense, through the years. They were always one or two,
hmm
one or two is either Beckett or PSA. But now earlier this year has bought SGC, um, and SGC has solidified itself as the number two, no doubt. And SGC, in my mind, the numbers and the sales will prove this out, is number one in vintage, hands down. Everybody trusts and loves SGC vintage because they feel like they're getting good customer service and accurate grading on
right,
vintage, and that's really important to a lot of vintage collectors.
right.
Now, would I send now we're here in 2024, Zach? Would I send ultra modern cars to SGC? And no, it doesn't make any sense. Um, it makes no sense to send ultra modern and modern SGC because if I get an SGC 10 on a card, it's not doing anywhere near. I mean, it's basically on a PSA 9 level,
Right.
maybe, and so even if I get a perfect card from SGC, it's not selling or doesn't have the value. So I've really concentrated a lot of my stuff SGC wise, put some of my vintage stuff on the screen because I have a couple of big vintage fighter cards. But
Yeah, I could pull that up.
yeah, so I've been doing a lot of back in the, and I got one PSA card here. So, uh, but
Yep.
yeah, so
Yeah, so go ahead and tell the viewers kind of what made you purchase these cards, what these are, and kind of what your thought process is. Because I love these older boxing cards,
yeah,
and for us UFC guys, this is really like this should be close and near and dear to our hearts because this is kind of what led to the UFC even being formed and what led to MMA even being formed. So to me, this is very important. And Josh, I don't know which one I want yet, but I do want
yeah.
a big vintage boxing card. So go ahead and tell us what these are.
Well, and I even did a video on Benny Leonard, which he's considered one of the best lightweights of all time. But this is Jack Johnson. I picked this up, I think $120. So pretty on the cheap.
hmm
But it's a one of those tobacco cards. So and all these cards are tobacco cigarette cards. So that was the only way that they in the early days got cards into kids people's hands, not kids,
Right.
people's hands.
Hey, the
Um,
kids probably were smoking back then, little kids.
um, but the tobacco cigarette cards, I just love them because they're like silhouettes. And they're just so like you can just sort of see a story within that. So
Yeah, they're real
that's
old
a
school.
pretty cool card right there, and it's in the 30s, but it's
Dude,
not like it's super expensive. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
very
But that's a pretty
approachable.
high grade in that. that card.
Very approachable. Here's this next one. This is really cool because Jack Dempsey's a super popular boxer. You know, everyone that's into combat sports should know Jack Dempsey. So,
Okay,
what? Tell us about this card.
so this is kind of a crazy this, and it was in a stack of boxing cards, mind you. This one I actually got graded myself,
Okay,
so
cool.
pat on my back there. This card was in a stack of like cigarette cards that I probably bought I want to say a couple years ago, and it cost me like $100, and then I got it graded by SGC. It was like $25, and this card is probably one of the highest grades you can find in a Dempsey. Um, and I know it's a two. Finding
Yeah,
anything that's higher
but
than a two,
1921, that's over a
yeah,
hundred years old.
yeah.
That's crazy.
So the people, people watching probably thinking, what's the value of something like this? This card is right around $750.
Wow, that's awesome.
Um, yeah, so and he was involved, him, and then I have the other card I'll show you, George Carpenter. Um, they were involved in what was considered the first like $1 million fight, and Dempsey won, and I wanted to make sure I had both of those. This is the George Carpenter card
Hmm.
that I was able to get in that stack that I was telling you about. And this card's probably in that $300 to $400 range. This is also a two, graded a two. And a lot of those cards that I got vintage wise seem to grade a one or a two, which I was extremely happy with. And this
Yeah,
is probably one of the higher
the
grade.
whole vintage grade, like what's good and what's bad as far as vintage
Yeah.
grading, to me is way. I have no idea what's good or bad depending on the age of the card.
That's part of that. It's looking at pop reports and things like that, but also understanding like if you can get anything like even a two, a three, a four, or five, and some of these like 100-year-old plus cards,
Right.
I mean, you're knocking it out of the park, man. Because
Yeah.
a lot of these cards are authentic, only when you get them graded. So you can see there. I just love, to be honest with you, go back to the SGC one. I just love seeing these cards too. I feel like the color pops
Oh
a
yeah.
little more
Big
too
time.
in the SGC slab to being in a PSA slab. So
Yeah.
these are some of my vintage collection. I got some more of the vintage cards. Like I said, I got that Benny Leonard that I did a video on,
Hmm.
some other fighting cards. But I'm into them super cheap, and I
Right.
got them graded super cheap. And that's the thing I love about SGC: no upcharging, no upcharging, no upcharging. Thank God. Um, because that's the other thing too, Zach. If I sent these cards, if I sent that Jack Dempsey to PSA, I'm going to be charged, upcharged.
Yeah, that's really a weird thing that they do. It doesn't really make sense, and it gives them incentivizes them to give cards a 10 that shouldn't be a 10 just because then they can then upcharge, right? Which to me is like very crooked, and that it shouldn't even be a thing just for that principle alone.
Oh, I think it's the biggest scam in the hobby, to be honest with you. And it also gives PSA the right and the ability to pop control. And that's why you hear that talk a lot of the times too. Is well, they can control how many upcharge or in a year on a particular set or a card or this, that, and the other.
Right.
I just that bothers me too. So yeah, look, I'm not going to sit here and bang the door down for PSA. Look, a lot of my big cards, it's probably 50-50 right now, but I would say a lot of my biggest cards are in PSA holders. But I have a lot of SGC cards, and I'm proud of it, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. And I have a few Beckett cards, that's it. So I'm open to everybody. Let's put it that way. But when it comes to my personal druthers, like you said at the top, I mean SGC is. I mean customer service is just kick butt. The turn
Very
times,
fast. Yeah, very
you
fast.
know, they do grading the way it should be, and I have so much respect for them. It's not like something where I get back a PSA sub and there's a PSA 6 in there, and it's like, what are you crazy?
Yeah.
I didn't send an ultra modern card. It's like that type of stuff, and
Mhm.
SGC never does that to me. So and I know there's a lot of PSA fanboys out there, and I get it because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
PSA delivers the
The
biggest
money.
the
Yeah.
biggest bang for the buck. So I have a lot of respect for that, but I am a little concerned moving forward about the monopoly. The PSA buying SGC concerns me. In the sense that I don't want it to change anything. I don't want it to change turn times. I don't want it to change pricing. I don't want it to change what SGC at the root of who they are is. And so far, it hasn't for the past, I guess 7 months that since PSA has owned SGC. There's talk of the slab change possibly with SGC going to a thinner, keeping the tuxedo look just like
Right.
PSA has now with the red I don't know. I don't want I competition is healthy, and
Yeah.
we need to have it across the board. And like I said, would I rather at the end of the day have some of my cards in an SGC slab? Yes, because they look better. To be honest with you, on some of the things, and some things look better in a PSA slab. And I still haven't found what looks best in a Beckett slab. But I mean, you know,
Shots fired at Beckett. Shots fired. Thank you so much again for coming on. I got one last question for you.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on the newer products, and in particular the 2024 Topps getting the license back? Kind of what's your thoughts on that? Are you trying to get any cards? Are you just waiting to see what happens? What's your opinions?
I want to say this: I was super hyped when UFC was going back to Tops. Um, but so far, I've been very disappointed. I think too part of it is there, and it's not just with UFC. It's also with like baseball and some of the other things that their Tops is doing under the Fanatics wing, and it's they're not understanding price points. Yeah, especially too is when you can look back on Topps Chrome right now, UFC, and you can look at Midnight. I mean, you can look at some of the sets that have already dropped, and I can go out to blowout cards and I can find them on clearance,
Yeah.
or I can find them at half the price, like a week or two later. So that should tell you right away that they're overpricing this product significantly on some of the stuff. Now I know that 2024 has not been the best year for UFC rookies per se,
Right.
and that so I think that hurts it a little bit too. But um, look, I'm a round one main event. I'm an old school person when it comes to like some of the things that I would love to see Tops do again with some of their product lines. I think on the UFC front too is we're going to see some things here trickle out for the rest of the year, and I don't know if they're going to be good or bad. Um, but I wouldn't say that I'm not against like purchasing some modern cards that are coming out of UFC because I do look at them all the time. I just would say it just depend on when I'm buying them, and I think a lot of the stuff, even like the midnight singles and things like that I'm seeing, that came just out of hobby boxes, they're so low. It's
Yeah.
there's no real opportunity in my mind to really do anything. Let's say you take some of those cards and you get them graded by PSA and you got a PSA 10. I think you can make some margins, but it's not the big enough opportunities in my mind to where it's worth the time and money and
Yeah.
all that stuff being put into that.
Yeah.
So I
And
would
the
like to see
risk.
some of that change.
Yeah, and the risk, because who knows
Yeah.
who knows whether they ever go up. But that's kind of an interesting thought. So we see midnight like completely bottom out right now, and if things are so low, eventually you would think maybe they come back up. Have you ever seen a trend where a product is like very low and it just stays low forever, or do you ever kind of see it rise back up?
I think time is the biggest thing on that, and I'll tell you this too, Zach, and I wish you were by my side when seeing some of this stuff. But you know, round one, let's go back quick, and I always bring things into historical context. So 2009, round one, and some of that other stuff, and you'll see it on when you're looking through on eBay or different sites
Mhm.
with discount stickers on them because nobody was buying any of that stuff at that
Right.
time, and it had no value. Now you look at that stuff, and it's like you can't afford any of
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
I'm always conscious of like the modern stuff right now. Okay, if there's somebody in that, like we're doing with Wembayana and some of the other stuff in other sports, the print runs are just so big that I don't know if those cards are going to hold any value. However, will the actual packs and wax hold some value? I think it's very possible that they do because there will always be a market in my mind, especially with breakers and the way that gambling is taking going on in the hobby, that people are going to need product and they're going to need it at whatever it costs because they're going to pass that cost on to somebody else. So I think even though we're looking at midnight on the bottom and Topps Chrome sort of bottom, there's some good singles in Topps Chrome, mind you,
Yeah.
but as it keeps going down and down and down, eventually time will be the ultimate say in that, and I think it'll eventually go up. As to how much some of that stuff will go up, I mean you and I could sit here
Right.
and debate that all day long. I
Yeah.
don't know, but I think there is a low point that it reaches,
Hmm.
and then it gradually goes up, and however that gradual incline is, I think just depends on what that product is, how much has already been opened, how many what are the singles currently going for, and things like that. So I'm bullish on UFC future cards, put it that way. But Fanatics and Tops really needs to get a handle on print runs and price points and some of these things moving forward, so that I think it's starting to be a little more of a barrier to UFC card collectors, because they don't want to spend you know over overpriced product to do some ripping with
Right.
on their own and things like that. Ripping should be fun, and that's why I said one of the things for the new collectors is no, don't rip, because unless you're doing it out of profit. So I want to see someday where we have a lot of people ripping UFC product because it's affordable and it's got some legitimate hits in it that people can rally around and be excited for. Um, I don't think we had any of that really with Panini, to be honest with you. I don't, to be honest with you, I really don't want to own a Panini UFC card, and I know that's a hot take. I mean,
That's a hot take because
yeah, yeah,
what's funny about this, right, is whenever I'm on the UFC card Reddit post or whenever I'm looking through people's Instagrams, I love looking at everybody's collections. Dude, most of the stuff is Panini, and I would say at least 60 to 70% of the UFC collectors are like almost all Panini collectors. And that kind of it brings up an interesting point that you were talking about print runs. So
yeah.
I know for basketball and then what was it? 90s wax was super high print runs, and then recently basketball and football is through the roof. So do you think we're there in the UFC card landscape? Like, do you think it's at all-time highs to where some of those will not have long-term value, or what are your thoughts on that?
Definitely on, I would say, all the Panini stuff, and is overprinted. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I just, from seeing a whole bunch of sets and things, it's just, yes, all the Panini era is overprinted now. But Tops and Fanatics is really starting to get into you know overprinting stuff, and following that same line that Panini took. It might have better designs, it might have better inserts, it might have better case hits, super short prints. But I feel like they're starting to fall in line with that. And Fanatics, and I'm going to separate Fanatics. Tops used to be really controlled with their print runs. I'm going back in the day. I'm talking 2000, early 2000s, late 1990s. Really controlled, and not putting out a bunch of product, and not a bunch of sets. I think the answer to some of the UFC situations specifically is to see how many sets Tops is actually going to run for this first year,
Yeah,
okay, and then see what is actually working and what's not working, in a sense, from a price point, from a print run, da 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 da, and then I would say start cutting. If I was, if I was them, we need to cut out a lot of these sets that people don't care about. And it's not just UFC; it's across the board: baseball,
right.
football. I mean, you name it. But I think specifically with UFC, if we're going to create a desirable product with some really cool cards and with some really cool fighters, you need to have a concentrated focus on some really cool sets that you can chase, that have some reasonable price points, that bring out some cool cards. And I think that's the only way to solve that. I don't want to see UFC printed into oblivion,
Right.
because that just not that gets someone really frustrated getting into the UFC collecting, because they're just like, now I can't even grab any card because it's not worth anything, type stuff.
Yeah. So
Um,
as far as the overprinting goes, is there a specific like the lower end parallels, the of 25, of 10s? Did those still hold value in those days when, like nowadays, or is the overprinting just kind of obliterate every single card that there is?
I think that's a tremendous question. Here's what I'll tell you is my rule of thumb, and this is what I tell everybody. I say one of ones always hold value, even though we got a jillion one of ones right now out
Yeah.
in the marketplace. Gold, so gold out of 10, gold out of 25, gold out of 50, gold in general will always be a super thing. And black cards, black. if it's a finite or other type of variations of black, black gold, even so. But the rest of the parallels, and we've gone on through a ridiculous rainbow of parallels
Yeah, there's so
across the
many. It's
hobby.
crazy.
Yeah. It's I don't see like a John Jones out of 499 blue shimmer or whatever set making any difference in 2024. Like that's not to me going to be a collectible card. Even a rookie card of, let's say, Bo Nickel out of 499, out of
Yeah.
299, out of 199, red, yellow, green, orange, whatever. I
Right.
don't think long term those cards are going to hold value. And I would say go ahead and flip those cards. You find somebody, you get a good grade on it, get a PSA 10, get rid of them, sell them at their high, because you can always buy those cards back in any type of color you want. But the golds, the blacks, the 101s, and I'm going to say too is, what survived from the 90s, Zach, was the special insert. So and the case hits. So I still think Kabooms, UFC, I think they're going to hold
Hmm.
long term, maybe at least for the next 5 to 10 years. I think they're good. Downtowns for UFC, I think they're okay. Color
You
Blast,
don't seem that confident in those.
well, I just I don't. I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and I've owned a couple of Kabooms and I've
Yeah.
sold them in downtowns and things like that. I just don't know if that particular card hit will last the test of time.
Right.
I try and put it in the box of like some of the 90s inserts and some of the things that we've done and that have lasted the test of time. And I think they will, because people really desire them and they're willing to pay up for them now and have been paying up for the past couple of years on them. But I don't know. I think for the next 5 to 10 years, we're probably good on Kabooms and downtowns. But if every other box is starting to have a
Right.
Kaboom or a downtown in it,
Yeah.
well, then my opinion is going to change, because then it's not even a hit anymore. It's just an insert that happened to come with your box,
Right.
type thing. So that's how print runs can really derail a super hit. And that's why I always, my collection, I always go towards lower pop stuff, lower, not as, maybe not as sought after on the market per se at the time, but it will eventually be sought after on the market. So that's sort of where I'm at as a whole, as a collector, and then also as a seller. I don't get attached to any card. And I say this in general. Even I got some kick butt cards that I own. There's not one card in my collection that I wouldn't sell today for the right price. And I think that's a thing you got to do. Even your Khabib, man. If someone came up to you and offered you $6K today for that Khabib, you better be selling that card, man.
Yeah.
I mean, no offense.
I need to get into that mindset, because I kind of just have like okay, I have it now. Let's it's over. Let's just sit and wait. But you're
And,
right. You're right. There should always be a price point when you should let it go.
and I would tell you, I was built exactly like that, Zach. I had that mindset too, of just like, oh, these are cards I'm never going to sell. I'm never going to touch. I'm always going to hand them down. But you can always upgrade. You can always get that card back. You can always find a better price point with somebody. So once that started to get into my mind, I was like, well, I'm not that attached to this card. I can sell it, make a huge profit, and then I can get back into when the price dips a little bit on that card. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of mentality you have, is like, don't don't have your collection as untouchable. You can always upgrade, you can always sell for major profit and use that profit to get into something else in the meantime. Then you can get it back into whatever you want, or what I mean. You
Yeah.
can change it up a lot. And I think some people get like stuck. I can't sell this card. Don't get into that mindset ever. You can always sell your cards and get it back.
I love it,
I
man.
know, and I know. Look, that Khabib card, I know it's tough to find, tough to get, mind you. I know, but I'm just telling you, if someone offered you double for what you paid,
Right.
and we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars, well, hell, I mean,
The,
I'll ship
the,
that card today.
the, and no, it's a fair point, because at a certain point we are in the territory where it's like, this is double triple what I paid for. I might be able to trade up into a red ink, or even a better grade. So I completely agree.
The biggest mistakes that I've ever made as being in the hobby, and this is a lesson for anybody too, is holding onto a card too long. There
Yeah.
have been many cards where I was like, I was already, like you were talking about, I was making double profit on it. And I just like, well, I could get to maybe triple profit. And that's when you start, that greed starts getting into your mindset on some of those things. And I don't do that anymore now. Now it's like, I'm selling
Yeah.
that card the second it happens. But I remember early on, like I was like, oh, I can hope this card even gets bigger and better, and it's going to sell for a lot more. And then it generally doesn't happen. And the hype that we talked about is
Yeah.
gone, and you're stuck with that card, and you're not making as much profit as you should.
Right.
So always take profit over cards in my mind to put back into cards that you want to use in the future, or you want to upgrade your collection or do things that you can make a difference with, and not getting stuck with anything. But yeah, early on in my hobby career, I was always getting stuck, trying to bigger money when I should have just been slapping myself silly, saying take double profit and move forward, because
Right.
you'll get it if you want to. So you run a kick butt channel, man. You got a big future, with this
Thank
whole
you.
content creation and things. You're staying in that lane too, which I think is really hard to do, but at the same time, I think you do it really good. I think you're building a strong audience. I've been watching you since the beginning, you and Eric, and I think I'm attracted to people that really are passionate about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and putting it together for the audience out there. And I just think your future in this whole world, like I said, if firefighting never doesn't work out, I think you got a future in editing. And like I said too, is I got my son working on doing some editing and stuff too. So I think it's just a lot of things that you can, that you and it's not just me, but I think you inspire other folks to, when you put some great content out. I think a lot of people really take that, and like, you put a lot of time into that. You can tell you put a lot of time into your stuff. So I just want to say, from the card community as a whole, especially from the YouTube world, and I've been doing on YouTube since 2006. Now I haven't been doing a card channel since then, but uh, I've been on YouTube watching card stuff since 2006. So I know good things when I see it, and you're definitely a good thing, man. So don't ever
Thank you.
hesitate. You always got a friend in this hobby. Don't ever hesitate to reach out, and you got a friend for life, man.
Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate those words, and I appreciate you coming on, man. You've been a great mentor figure for me in this hobby, and I really do mean that. And everybody, go follow Josh at the 047 Sports and Cards and TCG right now. Go click him. Go give him a like. And thank you, everybody. See ya.